Imagine carrying an entire relationship financially, emotionally, and mentally only to be told you re the problem. In today's powerful story, a woman finally realizes that the person holding her back in his life, it's the man she has been sacrificing everything for. But instead of letting the betrayal destroy her, she chooses something different: freedom. This is a story about reclaiming confidence, walking away from manipulation, and discovering your worth after years of being underestimated.
For my daughter's first birthday, my cousin Leo sent us a brand new smart nursery monitor. He said, "Just testing my new app, for peace of mind." My husband Ethan hated it immediately. "It's a security risk," he'd snap, "another way for hackers to get into our network." He was always turning it off, but I always turned it back on. Until this morning, when I woke to a completely dead screen. As I checked the wall socket, my phone buzzed. It was Leo. "Maya, don't touch the monitor. Grab Chloe and get out of that condo now. I am on my way." I just stared at the text. "Before we start, I want to thank you for being here. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing who's in our story community." And just to be clear, this is a work of fiction that I created to share with you all. It's not about any real people, though the feelings behind it are absolutely real. Our bedroom was silent as I woke up, the early Chicago light cutting through the shades. I rolled over and saw the smart monitor on my nightstand. The screen was black. That was wrong. It was always on, a silent, glowing feed from my daughter's room. My first thought was the plug. I reached down, tracing the cord with my fingers until I felt the prongs. It was securely in the wall. I pressed the power button on the side of the unit, holding it down. Nothing. The entire device was lifeless. I even unplugged my lamp and tried that outlet, thinking maybe a fuse blew. Still dark. Inside the nightstand was a small leather box of my grandmother's jewelry and a coffee table book on brutalist architecture Ethan bought me, back when he was trying to elevate my design sense for our new high-rise. But the monitor remained a dead piece of plastic. I stood up and caught my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. I looked haunted, a woman living in a life that suddenly felt foreign. My gaze drifted back to that blank black screen. For 3 years, that little screen was the first and last thing I checked each day. Seeing it dark felt like a personal violation, a small but deep crack in the foundation of my life, and a cold wave of dread washed over me. I pulled my silk robe tighter and walked to the door. Down the hall, my daughter Chloe's door was slightly ajar. I could see the soft pink glow of her glowing star projector. She was fast asleep, her breathing slow and steady. She was just 5 years old, completely unaware that our perfect little world was about to shatter. I had to keep her safe. I was still watching her when I heard Ethan's quiet footsteps padding down the hall. He appeared holding a tray with my morning tea, moving with the casual confidence of a man who believes he owns the world. On the tray sat my favorite porcelain cup, one we bought from a tiny shop on our trip to Kyoto. A wisp of steam rose from the amber liquid. He'd made it for me every morning since our wedding day. He knew I couldn't function without it. I always thought of it as one of his tiny, devoted rituals, the kind of thing that holds a marriage together. He smiled when he saw me standing there. It was that big, dazzling smile, the one that had charmed me from our very first date. He had a way of looking at me like I was his most prized acquisition, a look of complete and total possession. "Morning," he said, placing the tray on our bed. "Didn't expect you to be up so early." "The monitor's dead," I said, my voice flat, watching his face for any flicker of a reaction. He only hesitated for a split second, then walked over to the nightstand. "The monitor?" he asked, and I could practically see the gears turning behind his calm eyes. He picked it up, flipped it over, and fiddled with the cord. The performance was good, but not flawless. A man who is genuinely trying to fix something looks completely different. The body never lies as well as the mouth does. After a decade as an architectural historian, I know a fake when I see one. You learn to spot the subtle cracks under a perfect facade, the one modern screw in a historic restoration that gives the whole game away. And Ethan Hayes was not trying to fix that monitor. He was watching me, calculating my level of distress. Looks like it's completely shot, he said, setting it down. Must have been a power surge. Have you texted Leo about it? It was working fine when I went to sleep, I replied. He came over and put his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs instantly digging into the tense muscle beside my neck. He always knew exactly where I held my stress. He remembered every small detail I'd ever shared with him. For 5 years, I mistook that intense level of attention for love. It's just an old gadget, Elara. Daniel can send you another one. Or I can get you something more sophisticated, something that fits the minimalist style of our home. He delivered that line with a warm, patient smile, the kind that made my affection for my brother-esque gift seem childish and out of place. The style of our home, that was his mantra. He was always editing my life, upgrading my choices, until my own original personality felt like a distant echo. His touch was so precise, so knowing. It was always perfectly performed. For years I told myself that precision was just a sign of how much he cared. But standing there, his hands on my neck and the frame mysteriously broken, it felt like what it was, a method of control. You're probably right, I said, putting on a weak smile. It's nothing serious. I pulled away from him, making it seem like I was just reaching for my coffee mug, not recoiling from his touch. I'll text Daniel about it later. He nodded, gesturing to the mug. Drink that before it gets cold. I have an early call with the partners. He left the room. I stood frozen, listening to the sound of his footsteps disappear down the long hall. Then I walked to my vanity and picked up my phone. The screen lit up with one missed call from Leo. I ducked into our enormous walk-in closet, sliding the heavy door shut, and called him back. He answered on the very first ring, Maya. His voice was tight, stripped of all its usual easygoing humor. It was the voice of someone about to issue a warning. My cousin, Leo Vance, was a brilliant app developer who built software for some of the biggest names in tech. I had never, not once in my entire life, heard even a trace of fear in his voice. Not when his first company went under. Not when our aunt was sick. Not ever. But I heard it then, a slight tremble that sent a jolt of pure ice water through my veins. I need you to listen to me very, very carefully. My knuckles were white from how hard I was clutching my phone. Leo, what is happening? Why is the monitor broken? I broke it, he said. A heavy silence fell, and I could hear him taking a slow, shaky breath. I killed the feed. The app has a developer backdoor that logs audio snippets for diagnostics. It was for debugging. Maya, I have a flagged recording from last night now. You need to hear this, right now. The air in the closet suddenly felt thick and heavy, like the walls were shrinking around me. I'm serious. The dark closet, smelling of cedar and Ethan's expensive cologne, felt like it was tilting on its axis. It's the feeling you get when you find out your whole life is a lie. I pressed my hand against the wall to keep my balance, my fingers digging into the cool, smooth wood. Play it, I whispered, but my heart was screaming, please don't. Please tell me it's a bug in the system, and this is all just a massive, terrifying mistake. But Leo played the recording, and the first voice I heard belonged to my husband. I need to explain why his voice was so fundamentally wrong, because my own mind was desperately trying to reject what it was hearing. It was Ethan's voice, the same cadence, the same deep tone I'd listened to for 6 years over dinner parties, on quiet weekend mornings, and in the darkness of our bed. The same voice he used to explain complex property deals until I fell asleep. It was him, but the person I knew was gone from it. All the warmth, the charm, the persuasive energy he used when he was closing a deal, it was all gone. The voice on this recording was flat and clinical, like an engineer discussing a demolition. He was talking about me like I was a problem to be managed. The dosage has to be doubled this time. I'll tell her it's that new wellness supplement she's been wanting to try. She'll drink the tea. She always drinks the tea. My stomach twisted into a knot. I felt physically ill. Then a woman's voice replied, a voice that made my blood run cold. Catherine, my mother in law, the woman who constantly told me I was the daughter she'd always wanted, who said I was the only person who truly understood her son. On the recording, her voice was like a razor blade. Make sure it's enough to keep her docile. We can't have a scene when the attorneys get there. And Ethan, you have to get her to sign the conservatorship papers before she's thinking clearly. This is our only shot. I know, mother. Ethan's voice on the recording was sharp, annoyed. The documents have been sitting on my desk for a month. And the grandchild? His mother's voice was low, as if she hated the very word. What about Chloe? She's not a problem. She's our insurance policy if this gets complicated, which it won't. A short pause. By the time Maya is lucid enough to call for a lawyer, it will all be legally finalized. My knees gave out from under me. My hand shot out, catching myself on a rack of his suits, my knuckles stark white. Hangers clattered in the closet silence, and I slapped a hand to my mouth, stifling a scream. My eyes burned, but no tears fell. Not now. Not when Ethan was in the next room with a tray, with the tea he was about to drug me with. I swallowed the tears down, my throat raw. My chest felt so tight I thought my ribs would snap. 4 years. For 4 years he held me every night, saying I was everything to him. 4 years of him murmuring, I love you, and I will always, always keep you safe. For 6 weeks. He'd had those divorce papers drawn up for 6 weeks, and he used my daughter's name like she was some asset to be traded. In that single sickening moment, something inside of me just shattered. It wasn't just my heart breaking, it was all of it, twisting together into something cold and hard, something that knew what it had to do. Isabel. My father's voice crackled over the phone, sharp and raw, the sound of a parent trying to save their child from halfway across the world. Listen to me. You don't touch a thing. Don't even grab your wallet. He cannot know you're on to him. I need you to get Sophie and walk out of that apartment right now. Leo is waiting for you in his car, 2 blocks down the street. Dad. My voice came out as a broken rasp. I bit down on my lip until I tasted copper. Isabel, please. My father, a man I'd only heard say please twice in my life. Both times felt like the sky was falling. Now, get your daughter. A knock sounded on the closet door. 3 gentle, deliberate taps. 3 taps from a husband who thought the game was already over. Then Ethan's voice drifted through, warm and achingly familiar. The voice I had built my life around. Isabel, honey, your tea is ready. Are you all right in there? My heart hammered against my ribs so hard, I was sure he could hear it, could feel the vibrations through the wood and all our lies. My hands trembled. My knees felt like they might buckle. The weight of our shared life, a life I now knew was a fraud, was crushing me. I took one long, shaky breath. I found that still point inside myself. The one I go to when I'm restoring a fragile painting, and one wrong move could destroy centuries of art. It is where my hands stop shaking and my mind goes sharp. I went there now. I'm fine, I called out, my voice miraculously steady. Just looking for my blue cardigan. I'll be right out. I ended the call with my dad. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs until the trembling stopped, schooling my features into a blank serene mask. Then I opened the closet door and smiled at my husband. It was the performance of my entire life, and it bought me precisely 3 minutes. That was all the time I'd have. 3 minutes. I'd already mapped it out in the closet, my pulse pounding out each second. Ethan would take the tea to the kitchen island. He would pick up his phone and nightly ritual and scroll through his emails, playing the part of the powerful developer. 3 minutes. That was my only chance to stop being the woman I was and become the woman I needed to be. I stepped out of our bedroom, shrugging on a sweater, keeping my voice perfectly casual. Every movement was calculated. One misplaced sound, and the whole thing would collapse. I think I might just step outside for a minute, I said, pausing at the mouth of the hallway. Get some fresh air. This headache has been bothering me all afternoon, and the cold might help clear it. Ethan looked up from the kitchen. His face immediately softened into a look of perfect concern. It was an act. The slight furrow of his brow, the gentle eyes, the way he angled his body towards me. I had seen that expression 1,000 times and mistaken it for love. Now, with his cruel words seared into my brain, I could see the cold, hard math just beneath the surface. I'll come with you, he said, putting his phone face down. No, that's okay. I shook my head, offering a weak, tired smile. I just need 10 minutes alone with the night air. You know what I am like. I'll be back before your tea gets cold. I walked through the living room, brushing his arm as I passed a practiced, intimate gesture. Why don't you put on the game? You've had a long day. His eyes lingered on mine for a fraction too long. I held his gaze, my expression tired, loving, and completely empty. He finally nodded. Okay, but you should grab a jacket. It's bitter out there. I will, I lied and headed for the door. I did not grab a jacket. The second I was out of his line of sight and heard the TV click on, I moved. I didn't run. Running is loud. I moved with the silent grace I use in my studio, around things that are ancient and easily broken. One false move, and my entire world would come crashing down. I gently pushed open the door to Sophie's room. She was sleeping on her side, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. Her dark curls fanned out on the pillow, her lips slightly parted in that deep, innocent sleep of a child who feels completely safe. Her little whale nightlight threw a soft, warm glow onto her face. In that gentle light, she seemed so fragile, so unaware of the hurricane gathering just down the hall. Looking at her was a sharp, physical pain. My heart felt like it was tearing apart. She felt safe because she didn't know about her father's betrayal. She didn't know that when she woke up, her home would no longer be hers. She didn't know the man who read her bedtime stories had just called her leverage. She was so beautifully, blissfully unaware. And in that moment, protecting her innocence was the only thing on earth that mattered. Okay, my love, I whispered, lifting her into my arms in one smooth, familiar motion. She was a warm, heavy weight against me, pliant with sleep and total trust. I tucked her favorite blanket tightly around her small shoulders. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering, still caught in a dream. Mommy? Her voice was a tiny thread of sound. Shh. I kissed her forehead, my own eyes stinging with unshed tears. We're going on a little secret adventure. Secret? She mumbled, and her eyes fluttered shut, with the absolute faith of a 5-year-old who has never known a lie. That trust was a blade in my chest. I carried her down the hall and onto the guest room balcony. Withered ivy clung to the iron trellis. I already knew how cold the metal would be. I'd snuck out yesterday to test it, to make sure the rungs were solid. Tonight was the real thing. The iron was bitingly cold under my hands. It was built to last. Sophie's arms instinctively tightened around my neck as I swung my leg over the railing, searching for the first rung with my foot. My silk slippers were useless. The metal felt like a solid bar of ice. The night air was sharp and smelled like the coming winter. I gripped the trellis, adjusted Sophie's weight against my body, and took a deep, centering breath. Then I began to climb down. Every move was slow, deliberate, balancing my daughter's life against my own. Sophie's head rested on my shoulder, her soft breath warming my neck. She didn't even wake up. She just trusted me, trusted my body to keep her from falling, because I was her mother. The instant my bare feet hit the damp lawn, a sound tore out of me. It wasn't a sob, just a single, ragged gasp as the tension finally broke. Sophie's weight was a solid comfort. The grass was freezing and wet, soaking my slippers. The air tasted of rain and cold soil. And then, From the end of the driveway, a pair of headlights flashed twice. It was Leo. I clamped a hand over my mouth, trapping the sob that threatened to break free. My legs were shaking so violently, my teeth began to chatter. I had actually done it. I took one step toward the car, and then the master bedroom window right above me blazed with light. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. This wasn't a silent escape anymore. This was pure animal fear. As I sprinted barefoot across the lawn, clutching my daughter, I reached the Audi, and Leo had the door thrown open, his face grim, a look I hadn't seen since he was facing down corporate lawyers in a hostile takeover. It was the look a man gets when he stares into the abyss and decides to spit in its eye. "Get in," he commanded. I tumbled inside. He slammed the door shut, and the car was peeling away before I'd even fumbled for the seatbelt. "Leo." My voice was a shredded whisper. Sophie murmured in my arms, and I automatically rubbed her back. "Leo, the lights, do you think he saw?" The porch light came on, then the bedroom, Leo said, his gaze fixed on the road. "He'll check Sophie's room first. By the time he realizes you're gone for good, we'll be on the highway." He let out a long, controlled breath. "Dad has someone in the building as security office. Ethan wants to be able to track this car." The sob I'd been choking down since the closet finally ripped its way out of me. It was a single, ugly, gasping sound of pure relief. I buried my face in Sophie's soft hair, holding her so tightly she whimpered. I forced my arms to relax, forced myself to breathe. Sophie settled again with the incredible resilience of a child deep in sleep. And I just sat there in my brother's car, crying without a sound as our old life rushed away from us in the dark. "4 years," I whispered. The words felt like poison. "Ethan, for 4 whole years, I know." His voice was dangerously quiet, reigning in a raw fury. He brought me a warm glass of milk with honey every single night. I pressed my knuckles against my lips to stop them from shaking. Every night for 4 years, he remembered just how I liked it. He knew I didn't like cinnamon because it triggered my migraines. My voice cracked and fell apart. It took a moment to find it again. He was putting sedatives in my drink for a month, and I drank every last drop. I even thanked him for it, Leo. I told him he was the most thoughtful husband in the world. "Isabel." He said my name, and it sounded like the world was cracking in two. He cleared his throat. "I promise you, I will make it my life's work to ensure that man never has another peaceful moment." Get in line, I thought, and the coldness of it shocked me. The grief was gone. In its place was something sharp, something forged in ice, the kind of focus you get when your whole life has taught you that just seeing a problem is never enough. How you solve it is what matters. Lily stirred in my arms. Her eyelids fluttered, a little more awake. She looked up at me in the glow of the passing streetlights, her expression shifting from sleepy confusion to the simple truth that Mom was there, so everything was all right. "Mommy, you have teardrops," she whispered, lifting a tiny warm hand to my cheek. The sound I made was half a laugh and half the most painful sob I have ever known. "Just a couple," I told her. "But I'm okay now, sweetie. I promise." "Did you get a boo-boo?" she asked, studying my face with the intense focus she reserved for only the most important things. "Not the kind a kiss can fix." I turned and pressed my lips into the center of her small palm. She smelled of baby shampoo and that deeply comforting scent of a warm, sleeping child. I held on to that smell like it was the only thing keeping me afloat. "Go back to sleep. We're almost at Grandpa Robert's house." Her eyes shot wide open with the kind of pure, unfiltered joy that only the name Grandpa Robert could bring. "With Jasper?" she asked. "With Jasper," Ethan confirmed from the driver's seat, his voice heavy with an emotion I'd never heard from him before. Lily sighed a tiny, happy sigh and rested her head on my shoulder again. In less than a minute, her breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep. I just stared out the window. The bright city lights were fading into the dark, fast-moving blur of the highway. Somewhere back there, Julian Vance was walking into his daughter S' now empty bedroom. I looked at the back of my brother S' head. How many of Dad's people are on this for us right now? All of them, Vance, Ethan said. Every single one. This story is just getting started, and it's about to get real. If you're rooting for Clara, type 1 in the comments below. And a quick warning, some of the events that follow have been dramatized for the story. If that is too much for you, this is your moment to click away. But if you're still here, let's see this next chapter through together. The huge iron gates of the Hayes family estate closed behind us with a deep, final clang that I felt right in my bones. It was the sound of a sanctuary sealing itself off from the rest of the world. It meant you are safe. Nothing out there can get to you now. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for the last week. The main house was lit up, every first floor window, a warm, golden square against the darkness. I could see my father's outline in the grand doorway before the car even stopped. Ethan came around to open my door. I stepped onto the gravel driveway holding Lily, who was awake again and just staring at the massive house with wide, sleepy eyes. To her, this wasn't some fortress. It was just Grandpa's house, a magical place with hidden gardens and her absolute favorite cat, Jasper. My father, Robert Hayes, was waiting for us right inside. He didn't speak at first. He is 70 years old, with the ramrod straight posture of a man who built the country's most feared law firm out of nothing. But when he saw me standing on his marble floor, in a cheap hotel bathrobe and bare feet, clutching his granddaughter, that stern mask just broke. He crossed the foyer in 2 long steps and pulled us both into a powerful, protective embrace. He held on with the raw, desperate strength of a father who'd been listening to his son's panicked calls for hours, completely powerless to help his only daughter until this very moment. "You're safe now," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with emotion and cracking just a little. My own eyes began to sting again as I buried my face into his shoulder, just holding on for dear life. "I'm safe, Dad." We stayed like that for a long moment. Then Robert pulled back, cleared his throat, kissed my forehead, and became the man I'd always known. The man who turns pain and fear into cold, hard strategy. "The doctor is waiting for you in the library," he said, taking Lily from my arms as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Lily grabbed onto his shirt collar. "Grandpa, where's Jasper?" she asked, her voice filled with a child's laser-focused priorities, and Robert answered, "He's in the den, my love, waiting just for you," with a calm that I knew was costing him absolutely everything. He carried Lily down the hall, and I followed. A woman in dark blue scrubs was by the library door, her medical kit open on a nearby table. Her name tag read Dr. Elena Petrova. "Clara," she said, her voice calm and professional. "This will only take a moment. I just need your right arm." I sat down on the edge of a huge leather chair, pushing up the sleeve on autopilot. As the needle went in, I heard Lily's happy shriek of "Jasper" from down the hall, followed by a cat's rumbling, contented purr. That simple, everyday sound of joy made my chest tighten. I bit down on my lip hard, focusing on my breathing until the feeling passed. "All done," Dr. Petrova said, taping a cotton ball to my arm. "We'll have the results back within 12 hours. A full toxicology panel." "8, if it's possible," I said. "Please." She looked me right in the eye, her expression unreadable. 8 hours it is, she confirmed. The library had been transformed into a war room. My father, Robert Hayes, was at his massive desk with 2 laptops open, a yellow legal pad covered in his sharp, decisive script, and a half-empty mug of cold black coffee. He was a man who looked like he'd decided sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. He looked up at me over his glasses with an expression that said he'd been waiting for this war for years. "Clara," he said. "I want everything," I said, my voice like steel as I sat down across from him, his properties, his investment funds, his shell corporations. Every single asset Julian Vance thinks belongs to him. Robert just slid one of the laptops toward me. I pulled it closer and opened the primary folder. My father's forensic accounting team had been ruthlessly efficient. 5 years of Julian's entire financial life, all laid out in secure, encrypted files. I started digging through them with the cold precision of a former data scientist, hunting for the single point of failure in a network, pulling it apart piece by piece. It took me less than 15 minutes to find the system's core, the Nexus engine, the predictive analytics software his entire empire was built on, the one he sold to investors as his own personal genius. My creation, Robert, I said, and my voice was sharp, without a hint of a tremor. He looked up from his notes, hearing the kind of tone in a woman's voice that signals a shift in power. The original prenup, Schedule C, Section 3. Can we enforce it tonight? Robert put his pen down. Show me what you have. I turned the laptop so he could see the screen. It's the Apex project, I said. I wrote that code. He's been passing it off as his company's intellectual property, and tonight I am taking it back. Robert scanned the project files and the prenup, his eyes going over every line twice. He is the kind of lawyer who triple checks everything, building a case out of solid steel. I learned long ago that patience with him always pays off. He scrolled down the page. Then he scrolled back up. He took off his reading glasses, polished them on his silk tie, and put them back on. The prenuptial agreement, he said finally. Schedule C, Section 3. You're completely certain the intellectual property rights for the source code are yours alone. I wrote that clause myself, I told him. My attorney back then told me I was being paranoid. I told him I was being smart. There's a world of difference. Robert almost smiled. Almost. Tell me the exact wording. I recited it from memory, the way you know the laws of thermodynamics or the foundation of a skyscraper. Some things are just a part of you because you built your life on them. All proprietary algorithms, data models, and software architecture created by Clara Hayes before or during the marriage shall remain her sole and exclusive property, licensed to Vance Holdings on a project-by-project basis, pending her explicit written consent. The license for any one project is revocable at her discretion, effective immediately, upon written notice of a material breach of the marital contract. My brother, Ethan, had walked into the library while I was talking. He stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed, and when I finished, he said, his voice full of pride, "That's my sister." I felt a lump rising in my throat and quickly looked back at the laptop screen before the emotion could break my focus. "Robert," I said, "how fast can you get the injunctions filed?" "They're already filed," Robert said, turning his own laptop to show me. "I drafted them the minute you called me." He paused. "Mr. Davies, you've handled my company's legal since the garage days. You know my standards." The documents were a work of art, a surgical, ruthless takedown. They listed every key patent, every proprietary algorithm. They twisted my own CEO contract, line by line. It referenced all our major funding rounds, from the initial seed money to the big Silicon Valley venture capital that put us on the map. It ordered, with no room for debate, that my executive authority was suspended, pending an emergency board review. I read it, then pulled out my phone and texted a name I hadn't needed in a year. Leo. "It's Chloe. I need you. Follow the money." The response came back almost instantly. "Knew this was coming. Give me a few hours. I'll trace every offshore account he used to siphon funds from the Series C, every back-channel deal memo, every piece of our code he leaked to competitors. You'll have it all, Chloe." A beat, then another text. "I'm just furious it took this long for someone to finally call him out. He's been coasting on your vision since that first big product launch." Something inside me snapped not with anger, but with the stark, cold clarity of being seen by someone who always suspected the truth, but never had the proof. I set my phone on the polished boardroom table, pressed my palms against the cool glass, and took one long, shaky breath. He's on it, I told Mr. Davies. Excellent. The lawyer turned his monitor and attached two more files, his fingers a blur on the keyboard. I'm adding a temporary restraining order and the executed founder's agreement as exhibits. This goes to Julian's personal legal team, the entire board of directors, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, simultaneously. He glanced at me. Do you want to review the final filing one last time? No, I said. I want him ruined. Mr. Davies just nodded. He swiveled the screen toward me and placed the cursor over file. Then he sat back, offering the final click to me, because he knew some wars have to be started by the one who was betrayed. I clicked the mouse. The timestamp on the screen read 1:21 a.m. The injunction fired off into the digital world, hitting the servers of three major banks, the company's entire C-suite, and one very personal email account. In a few hours, when the stock market opened, Julian Vance's career as a tech golden boy would be frozen solid. He had no idea, of course. He was out somewhere, probably networking at some venture capital dinner, or maybe berating his latest assistant, trying to get a hold of me. He was doing all that, completely oblivious that the foundation of his penthouse overlooking the bay was about to turn to sand. I stared out the window at the San Francisco skyline. My reflection was a faint ghost against the city lights. Enjoy the view, Julian, I thought. It's the last time you'll see it from up here. I got maybe 3 hours of sleep on the conference room sofa, using my blazer as a blanket, my phone on the floor where I'd feel it buzz. At some point, my dad, Liam, must have slipped in and draped a heavy wool blanket over me without a sound. It was such a dad move, quiet, steadfast, and fiercely protective, that when I woke and saw it, my eyes burned for a moment before I blinked it back. It was 7:48 in the morning. My phone had over 100 notifications. I sat up, clicked the top one, and saw what my husband Julian Vance had posted online at 6 a.m. Whilst I was sleeping here, and our daughter Olivia was safe in her room at my parents' house. The photo was from last year's Tech Innovator Awards. We were on the main stage at the convention center. Julian in a flawless designer suit, his hand possessively on my lower back, the two of us sharing a private joke. I remembered that exact moment. A journalist had just called our new app revolutionary, and Julian had whispered something clever in my ear. It was a real smile, a genuine moment of shared victory, which made it the perfect tool for his betrayal. The caption read, "Last night, my pregnant wife, Chloe, suffered a severe breakdown from the immense pressure of her work and left our home. She's not answering her phone. She's been struggling with burnout, and I am terrified for her and for the safety of our unborn child. Chloe, my love, if you're reading this, please know how much I cherish you. Please come home. The house is so empty without your light." The morning news host looked on with such sympathy. The online comments were a flood of support. What a caring, incredible husband. We're all praying for her safe return. This is so tragic. I was watching it all on a tablet when my brother Leo walked in with coffee. He saw my face, took the device, watched the news clip, and let out a string of curses that made our golden retriever Copper lift his head. "Leo," I whispered, "Olivia is just in the other room. I know where Olivia is." Leo's jaw was tight, his knuckles white. He handed the tablet back. He used the photo from our company retreat in Aspen, Chloe. The one from your 10-year anniversary. He's using that picture to paint you as unstable. I know, Leo. You can't just let him get away with this. He cut himself off, raking a hand through his hair. Please tell me you have a plan to hit back. I am going to hit back, I told him, but not on his terms. Olivia's soft footsteps padded down the hall before she appeared in the doorway, dressed in sparkly space-themed pajamas, her blonde hair a tangled mess. Cooper trotted over to rest his head on her leg. She looked from me to Leo with that sixth sense all kids have for grown-up stress. "Why is Uncle Leo's face all crinkly?" she asked. "Uncle Leo does not have a crinkly face," Leo said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was just thinking really hard about a new app. Come here, you little hacker. He scooped her up, and she giggled, grabbing onto his shirt. I watched them, my heart a brutal mix of love for my family and pure, cold fury. It was almost too much to contain. Mommy, Olivia said, now settled on Leo's hip. I saw Daddy on Grandpa's news channel. He looked sad. Why was Daddy on the TV? I set my mug down, walked over, and cupped Olivia's small face in my hands. I poured all of my resolve into that single look. Her eyes were the same deep blue as Julian's, a constant, painful reminder, and my love for her was a force that could burn worlds down. Daddy is working through some very complicated grown-up things, I said gently. But you don't have to worry about any of it. Your only mission right now is to find Grandpa Liam and convince him to make his famous chocolate chip waffles. Her eyes lit up. With whipped cream? Go on. You're the only one he's powerless against. She instantly squirmed to get down. Leo set her on the floor and she and Cooper raced down the hall, a tiny hurricane of life that both shattered my heart and put it back together. I turned back to Leo. He wants this played out in the media, a public spectacle. I shook my head. He would win that war. It makes this about drama, not data. I picked up my phone. I need you to find the doctor who signed off on this psychiatric concern he's peddling. Find out who paid him. Leo came back to the office later that day, his laptop open, and his face told me everything. His face was grim, his eyes had that sharp focus he gets when he's deep in a data trail, hunting a ghost in the machine. Found him, he said, sliding the tablet across the table. Dr. Marcus Thorne runs a high-end executive wellness retreat in Napa. Very private. He was paid to file a psychiatric fitness report on you 3 weeks ago. He tapped the screen. It alleges you had 2 consultations, April 3rd and April 15th. The dates just hung there in the silence. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. April 3rd, I said. I was in Austin giving the keynote at that tech summit. My face was all over every tech blog and live stream. I was there the whole weekend. I know, Leo said, his voice flat. I watched the stream. April 15th. My voice was tight. You and I were at Mom's anniversary dinner. At that French place she loves downtown. We were there for hours listening to her stories, and you kept trying to steal my crème brûlée. Leo managed a dark, humorless laugh. It was a damn good crème brûlée, Chloe. I know. I leaned on the desk, the cold metal of the frame a shock to my system. I was not in some Napa clinic on April 15th. I was watching you fight a tiny spoon. I pulled the tablet closer and opened the full report. So this Dr. Thorne either made this up from whole cloth or someone was feeding him a script. I started reading the clinical notes and my blood turned to ice. It listed everything in cold medical language: executive burnout, emotional volatility, and impaired judgment regarding company strategy. My hand started to shake. It wasn't just anger. It was a deep, chilling recognition. I knew every symptom on that list. I'd been feeling so scattered for months, just writing it off as founder stress and looming deadlines. Leo, I whispered, my voice barely there. How is this possible? He was already typing again, his face a mask of concentration. Then he just stopped. Oh, God, he spun his laptop around to face me. A shell corporation registered to my husband Julian. It was wiring monthly payments to a boutique compounding pharmacy for a custom prescription filled under my name. My hands flew to my stomach, the tablet clattering onto the desk. I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt like they were encased in concrete. There was a draft, a press release, announcing my indefinite leave of absence due to health concerns. Julian. He wasn't just predicting my breakdown, he was engineering it. It was a coup. To take my own company from me. I couldn't even form the thought. Leo was suddenly there, his hands on my shoulders, holding me steady. The way you brace someone for impact. Chloe, look at me. Breathe. I looked up, and my brother's face was a mask of cold fury I had never seen before. His expression was granite. I had never seen my brother look so threatening. He planned it, I choked out the words like glass. He scripted this like a product launch. He found the poison. He found the doctor to create a fake diagnosis. And every single night he'd come home, kiss me, and ask if the stress of the gallery was getting to me. A sob tore from my throat. He asked if I needed to step back, Leo. Every single night. My brother pulled me into a hug and just held on while I fell apart. What else was there to say? I let myself break for about 60 seconds, just a raw, furious cry into his shoulder. Then I pulled back, wiped my face. I grabbed my phone. Leo, I need you to file everything, I said. I want his assets frozen. I want his company board notified before the market opens tomorrow. Just then, Leo's phone pinged. It's the investigator, he said, his eyes scanning the screen. You have to see this. I was already grabbing my purse as he read it aloud. He found something at the penthouse. Meet me at the office now, he said. I was out the door before he finished the sentence. Leo's office felt like a vacuum. Or maybe it was me, just filled with cold, sharp rage. He stood by the conference table, a single file placed squarely in the middle. Our father was there too. He was standing by the window, his arms folded, his face looking 10 years older. Just show me, I said, my voice empty of everything but resolve. Leo gave me a look of quiet understanding, the look of a brother who knows that only the truth can cauterize a wound this deep. The lab report shows persistent exposure to a sophisticated nerve agent, Dr. Evans explained. We tested the hair sample. It shows a methodical, low-dose delivery over the last 3 weeks, 21 days. The number echoed in my head as my memory filled in the blanks. 3 weeks ago, I collapsed during a gallery opening, blaming it on low blood sugar. An intern had to drive me home. 3 weeks ago, I completely botched a major auction bid, sending a rambling, confused email I don't even recall writing. I told myself the vertigo and the brain fog were just pregnancy symptoms. I needed more sleep. 21 days, I whispered. My voice was eerily calm. That calm felt like the most dangerous thing in the office. The blood work confirms exposure within the last 48 hours, Dr. Evans continued, which means he kept going. He was still drugging you the night you left, the smoothie. That special prenatal blend he insisted on making me every night, with that kind, worried smile. The smoothie I left untouched on the counter as I slipped out the back door, carrying my daughter in my arms. Across the room, my father made a strangled noise. It was quiet and sharp, the sound of a man taking a blow he never imagined possible. He faced the window, one hand flat against the pane, his shoulders rigid. I knew he was replaying the last few weeks in his head, just like I was. All the Sunday brunches, the times he'd asked how I was, and I just said I was tired. Dad, I started to say, just a minute, Chloe, he choked out, his voice raw. Just give me a minute. I let him have it. I turned back to Dr. Evans. Olivia, I said, she used to have sips of that smoothie with me. My heart started pounding against my throat. She loved the taste. She always begged for a sip. She needs to be tested, doctor, now. Dr. Evans was already standing. I took a sample from her last night as a precaution, she said. I rushed the test the second you mentioned the daily smoothie. The lab sent her results over with yours. She met my eyes. Olivia's tests are clean, Chloe. She's completely clear. The noise that tore out of my throat wasn't a cry. It was something more animal. I grabbed a chair to stay upright, doubled over as pure relief shattered me. My entire body started to tremble. My knees buckled. The wave of relief was so intense it felt like agony. She's okay, I sobbed. She's okay. She is perfectly fine, Dr. Evans confirmed, her voice soft. My father came over and put a hand on my back, a steady, solid presence. I just knelt there, breathing, until the shaking finally stopped, replaced by a cold, heavy certainty. I stood up, wiped my face. I looked at Leo. I want this entire toxicology report certified and notarized, I told him, and I want the petition amended. I took a deep, painful breath. Julian Vance wasn't just conspiring to harm me. He was actively poisoning me and his unborn child for weeks. This isn't just domestic abuse. It's not just assault. I grabbed the file from the table. You add attempted murder for me and for my child, Leo, because that is what happened here. Leo began writing instantly, his pen flying across the legal pad. One more thing, he said without looking up. The court granted the emergency protection order. He can't get within 500 yards of you or Olivia. He paused. And Chloe, his two biggest investors, pulled out of the merger this morning. The news is starting to leak. I just stared at the report. 3 weeks. A period of my life that would always be a wound. Good, I said. Ruin him. I had personally designed the integrated smart home system for our San Francisco penthouse long before Julian and I were married. It was a professional habit for an architect obsessed with clean lines and hidden functions thinking about security. The main hub was a custom piece I designed for the living room, a sculpture of polished steel that looked like decor. It was a system Julian enjoyed, but never looked at closely enough to find the pinhole camera I'd built into its base. I opened my laptop and connected to the private network. I hadn't checked the feed since the night I fled. I couldn't bear to see that place as just a crime scene. But today, I could. The connection took a moment. Then the living room came into sharp focus. Isabella was on my sofa. She was settled into my favorite spot, feet tucked under her as if she owned the place. She wore a tailored blazer, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She was sipping from a delicate porcelain cup, a cup from the antique tea set my grandmother had given me on my wedding day, my tea set. She was wrapped in the antique quilt I kept on that couch, the one that was my mother's. My breath caught in my throat. Julian walked in from our bedroom. He was wearing that old university hoodie, the one with the frayed cuffs he refused to throw away. He sat next to Isabella. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder with a familiar ease that made me sick. In my home, while I was supposed to be falling apart. She's gone completely quiet, Julian said, massaging his forehead. No threats, no lawyers calling. Nothing. That isn't good, that's bad, Isabella replied. She set her cup down on my antique coffee table no coaster, leaving a damp ring on the wood. A hot wave of fury pulsed behind my eyes. Of all the horrible things he had done, that tiny mark of disrespect felt incredibly intimate. Silence means she's plotting, Isabella continued. Who does she have? Her brother, the lawyer. Her father's entire network. Julian's voice was tight with anxiety. And she has her father's money. Isabella sat straight up at that. What about her brother? Is he any good? Julian, he's one of the best prosecutors in the state. She snapped, her tone turning sharp. This is very bad. He doesn't just file for divorce. He builds criminal cases. Julian buried his face in his hands. I know. Then we have to get in front of this, she insisted. We have to shape the narrative. We leak it to the press. Find a former employee, a rival gallery owner, anyone who will say she's always been erratic, that she's been cracking under the pressure for months. She grabbed his hand, her voice urgent and low. You have to frame her as unstable before she has the chance to show Chuanes a single piece of evidence. And what if she has evidence? Julian's voice was thin and a shiver went through me. It wasn't the voice of a guilty man, it was the voice of a gambler trying to count the cards. Isabel just laughed. What could she have? She ran out of here with nothing but her purse. She has her family and a bruised ego, that's all. Sophia raised her champagne flute to the camera for a social media story. Mark is my biggest supporter, she purred. We have a vision. My hand was ice cold on my laptop's mouse. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was pure, chilling focus, the kind you get when your enemy thinks you're a fool. She had no clue I'd hired a forensic accountant. She didn't know I had copies of the shell company's bank records. She had no idea her gallery was being investigated by the IRS. And she certainly didn't know her little interview was being streamed to my brother's apartment. She saw me as the dutiful, pregnant wife. She didn't know I was orchestrating the whole show. I saved a clip of her interview, the file name already labeled for evidence. I turned to my brother, Leo, who was staring at the screen, his face pale. He looked like he was holding his breath. Leo, I said, my voice steady. I need the best digital forensics guy you know. I need someone who can create a paper trail invoices, bank transfers so perfect that it looks like Mark's been hiding money from his business partners, not just me. Leo just blinked. He looked from the video stream back to me. On screen, Sophia laughed, accidentally knocking over a brand new baby rattle someone had gifted us. A cold, quiet anger settled on his face. He said, I'll have someone for you within the hour. The forger Marcus found had a discreet studio near Bellevue. A man named Mr. Dubois, who'd spent 30 years making museum-grade copies for exclusive clients and film sets. When Marcus showed me his work, I saw a copy of a Picasso sketch so flawless it gave me chills. The line work was exact. The way he artificially aged the paper showed a level of mastery that was just breathtaking. Tell him I need 3 pieces ready by Friday, I said. I'll send the high-resolution files tonight. The replicas need to feel old, not just look it. They have to be completely convincing. I ended the call. While Leo was spiraling, I drove to our family estate and entered the art vault, the climate-controlled chamber holding my father's private collection. 50 masterworks gathered over a lifetime by a man who loved art more than people. Standing there in the silent, chilled air, the pain I felt was older and deeper than the fresh wound from the past few days. It was a soft, familiar ache. I'm so sorry, Dad, I whispered to the empty room. I promise I will protect everything you built. Then I opened my laptop. Leo never had access to my work email, but my personal one he insisted we share a calendar years ago, a move I once found romantic. I composed a new message to our family's art advisor. I attached a file with images of the 3 most priceless drawings. Then I typed my message. Thinking of getting a new appraisal on Dad's collection. Some of these could be worth a fortune by now. I put the advisor's name in the to field and my own in the BCC. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop, resisting the urge to see if Leo had opened it. That would make it feel too real, using my father's memory as bait in a trap for the man who was trying to destroy me. Marcus walked in, phone in hand. He had that look, the one that meant our plan was working even better than we'd dared to imagine. That new tower project just lost its lead investor, he said. And Clara, the quarterly reports are public. 2 more of his biggest backers pulled out this morning. Vertex Innovations and Quantum Leap Capital. He showed me the stock price on his phone. Those 3 investors were nearly 70% of his liquid capital. I just stared at the plummeting numbers. He'll be desperate by this evening, I said. He's already there, Marcus replied, switching to the live feed from my home. The living room was dim in the late afternoon sun. Leo was pacing back and forth, something I had never seen him do. He was always so composed, so in control. Control was his weapon. Pacing was pure panic. Sophie was on the sofa, watching him with an intensity that showed she was finally seeing the trouble they were in. 3 investors in one day, Leo was saying, his voice tight. This isn't just a run of bad luck. Someone is systematically coming after me. It's Clara, Sophie said, her voice flat. It has to be her. She doesn't have those kinds of corporate connections. But his voice broke on the word connections, and I knew he didn't believe what he was saying. Deep down, he always knew I wasn't just some trophy wife. He knew what my family was capable of. His phone chimed on the coffee table. He lunged for it. He read the screen, and I watched his face shift through 3 distinct emotions in under 5 seconds. Confusion, then dawning awareness, and finally, a look I knew instantly: raw, unadulterated greed. Clara just emailed our art advisor, he said, his voice slow. Sophie got up to look over his shoulder. Her eyes widened. A full appraisal of the entire collection? She looked at him. How much money are we really talking about here? Her father's drawings, Leo said quietly, almost to himself. The last time they were valued, the big three were estimated at just under 20 million. The greed on his face was no longer just a spark. It was a raging fire. Sophie's hand clutched his arm. Leo, she whispered, $20 million would fix everything. The bad loans, the lost investors, all of it. We could just disappear. He looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then he looked back at the phone. I need to find out where she keeps the official deeds of ownership. I watched the whole thing unfold from Marcus's office, my hands folded calmly on the desk, my breathing even and slow. The bait was in the water. The hook was set. I felt the precise moment he took it. Marcus, I said, call the estate manager. Tell him to have the fake ownership papers ready by morning. The forger delivered the 3 fake drawings on Friday, wrapped in archival tissue and packed in humidity-controlled cases. His caution told me he knew the value of what he was carrying, even if he didn't know the real game. I met the courier at the service entrance myself. When I opened the first case, the piece inside made me gasp. It was my father's favorite, a charcoal portrait by Sargent. The paper was aged perfectly, the glass in the frame had that faint, almost imperceptible ripple of old production. The forgery was so good my professional instincts took over, and I started searching for the tiny tells, the little signs that separate a master copy from the real thing. It took me a full minute to find one. This is magnificent work, I said. The forger, Mr. Dubois, was a slight man with ink on his knuckles and the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need praise. The signature was the hardest part, he said. Getting the pressure of the graphite just right took all day Thursday. But I think they will pass any inspection. They'll pass, I said. Thank you. After he left, I took the fakes to a different storage room and opened my own case. Inside were the trackers, each the size of a rice grain, embedded in a tiny device that looked like an archival tag. I developed the system in graduate school to help prevent the theft of priceless artifacts. The tags use a blend of GPS and motion sensors to know exactly when an item is moved. Once activated, they transmit their precise location and an asset ID, second by second. With the same care I'd use on the real art, I attached each tag to the back of a frame, hidden under a fake inventory sticker. My breathing was even, my hands perfectly steady. Simon appeared in the study doorway just as I sealed the third tracking device. He watched me for a moment, his way of showing intense focus. He finally spoke. Your father actually drew up the first plans for a system like this. Did you know that? I know, I said without looking up. You showed me his journals when I was 16. He would have been proud of this, Simon said softly. His voice was a mix of respect and sorrow, and I just tightened my jaw and kept on working. Yesterday, I drove to the city to meet Detective Miller in the Major Crimes Division. He was in his late 40s, sharp, with the tired eyes of a man who had seen everything. I placed the tracker and the file on Leo's financial crimes on his desk, and he read through it all without a word. Then he looked at me. So you're telling me you intend to be the main witness, he said. I am telling you I am the evidence, I replied. I just need a warrant signed and your team ready to go. These trackers give you a live location, a suspect, and a felony in motion. All you need to do is show up. He studied me, weighing if I was a genius or just dangerously reckless. Then he said simply, give me the tracker serials. I pushed the list of ID numbers across his desk and he began typing. The forged inventory list our contact made showed the correct pieces and their values, but it pointed to a dummy locker on a lower, abandoned floor. The actual fakes were in a secure vault under my name, and the real collection, already locked away in a bank downtown, safe until this entire nightmare was over. Leo showed up at the storage facility on Thursday morning, just after 10. The manager called me the instant he read the name. He says he's acting on your behalf, he whispered. I told him I required your direct approval but gave him the public inventory. He was there for 10 minutes. He photographed every single page. Perfect, I replied. Did he seem confident? There was a short pause. He looked like a man who believed all his financial problems were about to vanish. I thanked my contact and hung up. For the next 36 hours, Marcus and I were glued to the monitors. We watched the feeds in shifts, 2 hours on, 2 off, like a grim bedside vigil. Then, Friday at 8:15 in the morning, a camera picked up a black cargo van pulling into the rear loading dock. Marcus was on duty. He knocked twice on the study door, our signal. I was already on my feet. On the monitor, a man in a dark hoodie got out, carrying a large, reinforced case. He moved quickly, without any hesitation. He walked like a man who had rehearsed this exact move 100 times. At the back service entrance, he punched a code into the keypad. My birthday. A number he'd taken from me years ago, vowing it would be his special password, too. The light flashed green. Detective Miller, I said into my phone, he's inside. He was in there for exactly 6 minutes and 41 seconds. I know because I counted every one of them. The cameras showed him moving through the lower corridors with the cold efficiency of someone who had memorized the blueprints, which he had. For 3 days, he'd studied that fake shipping manifest, planning a path from the fire escape to avoid the lobby completely. He'd done his homework. It's funny, for a man who couldn't assemble a single piece of flat-pack furniture in our 5 years together, Leo Pierce was suddenly a master of detail when millions were at stake. I watched him on the monitor as he picked the locks on 3 separate vaults, his tools looking shiny and new. He slid each priceless drawing into a protective sleeve from his bag. He moved fast, but with a careful reverence he never had for art itself. The irony was almost too much to bear. He treated those forged documents with more care than he ever showed our marriage vows. 7 minutes flat. That's all it took. He slid the portfolio into his briefcase and headed for the parking garage. He's leaving the office, Leo said, watching the GPS dot on his monitor. His voice was all business, no emotion. He's getting on the I-95, heading downtown. I already had my lawyer on the phone. Ben, he's on the move. Gray Mercedes, heading for the marina. Ben's voice was calm. We see him, Amelia. The investigators have been on him all morning. We're letting him meet the buyer. We need a record of the wire transfer, Ben explained. Got it, I said. Leo's software will flag it the second it clears. I hung up and put the financial tracker on the main screen. There it was, a single progress bar, slowly filling across the monitor. I've designed user interfaces for years, but this one I called it the Albatross. I built it just for him. It wasn't triumph. Not yet. It was that awful, silent pressure before everything breaks. Leo switched the screen to the buyer's office camera. The buyer's office was in a new soulless high-rise in Brick Hill. Not illegal, but the kind of place deals go to die quietly. A man named Victor Stone ran the operation. I knew the name. In Miami real estate, you know the men who make problems disappear for a price. Our video feed was perfect because Leo had hacked their network in about 5 minutes. Amateur hour, he'd muttered. They never even changed the router's admin password. Victor Stone was already at his desk, waiting, when Mark walked in. Victor was a man in his 50s with the dead eyes of a shark who smelled blood in the water. He watched Mark spread the property deeds across his glass desk. Let's see the title, Victor grunted, not even offering a handshake. Mark passed him the folder. Victor glanced at the paperwork for less than a minute. 1.5, Victor said flatly. For the condo. It's appraised at 3 million, Mark snapped, his voice tight. His voice was strained, but he was trying to sound in control. I need 2 million. Victor smiled, a cold, empty gesture. No, you need cash and you need it now. This is a fire sale. 1.5. Take it or leave it. I watched Mark's shoulders slump on the screen, a man completely cornered. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity. Just the quiet, satisfying click of a lock falling into place. 1.5, Mark managed to say. They shook hands. On my laptop, the progress bar turned from yellow to a glaring final red. A notification flashed on the screen. Albatross alert. Fraudulent transfer initiated. Account holder confirmed. Mark Lawson. Original asset holder, Amelia Hayes. A data packet was sent to the DA's Financial Crimes Unit. Case file HMDFC 310524. My phone rang before the notification even faded. It was Ben. They're filing the emergency injunction right now. I could hear the urgency in his voice. Behind me, Leo let out a huge sigh he'd been holding for weeks. Amelia, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You got him. It's done. I just stared at the picture of the beachfront lot on my screen. It was supposed to be our future home. That sale was the tripwire I needed, broadcasting Mark Lawson's fraud to the authorities. My entire plan was designed to protect the future I was building for my child. Yes, I whispered, he is. The call came in at 5:15 p.m. Leo had gone to the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses of water and a look I'd never seen on his face. It was sheer exhaustion, the kind you only see after a battle is truly won. Ben called, he said. They have Mark, the buyer, Victor too. Both are being questioned. He said the transfer was frozen and the property sale was voided. He pushed a glass of water toward me carefully. It's over. Amelia. I stared at my hands, resting on my pregnant belly. I expected to feel this huge rush of relief, like I could finally breathe again. But it felt quieter, heavier, like I'd been carrying a boulder for so long my spine had curved around it, and now I had to learn to stand up straight again. And Sophia? I asked. She wasn't at the meeting, Leo said, but Ben says they have Mark's phone. Records of every inflated art purchase, every wire transfer to her gallery. It goes back over a year. He met my eyes. They're picking her up tonight. Just then, my dad walked into the room. He had that look of someone who'd been pacing in the hall, waiting for news. He just stood there for a moment, his eyes filled with a fierce pride. He came over and put his hands on my shoulders, squeezing gently. You did it, honey, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It's finally over. Almost, I said, but I leaned my head against his chest for just a second. I needed that. I deserved it. An hour later, our lawyer, Ben, showed up with a briefcase that looked ready to explode. Before we file the divorce petition, you need to see the full scope of this. It's staggering. Show me, I told Ben. He opened his laptop. Over the last 18 months, Lawson Development made 17 separate art purchases, each from one gallery. The total comes to over $2 million. The Sofia Vargas Gallery has no other significant sales record. It effectively exists as a shell to launder this money. He looked at me gravely. $2 million, Amelia. Siphoned from the joint venture fund and paid directly to his mistress. From the company whose reputation and profits were built on your designs. The money I earned, the capital from my success, was taken by my husband and given right to her. My heart didn't break. It turned to ice. It was the sickening moment of realizing the life you built was a complete fraud. What did they do with it? I asked. Ben turned the page. A penthouse condo on South Beach, 3,000 square feet, paid in cash, 1.8 million. The title listed both Mark Lawson and Sofia Vargas. Ben hesitated. The sale closed in April. 6 months ago. While I was managing contractors and working until midnight to get our flagship project launched, he was buying their home. He would call me, telling me not to work so hard. While I was designing a nursery, he was decorating their bedroom. A dry, broken sound escaped my lips, the noise of a structure collapsing. Ben, my lawyer, put his hand on my arm. The pressure was a welcome anchor. What are the charges? I asked, my voice strangely level. Business fraud, Ben said, ticking them off. Embezzlement, conspiracy, money laundering, And that's just the criminal side. We haven't even started on the divorce settlement. The DA is looking at racketeering charges, Amelia. This is far beyond a simple divorce. It's major felony fraud. Good, I said. File everything. I want every bank record, every doctored invoice, every text message, the photos from the PI, the proof of my pregnancy. I want Mark's entire fraudulent enterprise dumped on the state attorney's desk by morning. It's already on its way, Ben assured me. My phone lit up on the table. The name glowed, Catherine Lawson. I watched it ring. 1, 2, 3 times. The woman who called me the daughter she never had at every charity ball. I let it go to voicemail. Her name flashed on my screen, but I felt nothing. The ringings stopped. I set my phone face down on the table. What time does the district attorney open tomorrow? I asked. 9 o'clock, Ethan said. I want that entire file on his desk by 8:55, I told him. Not one single page missing. The main gate buzzed at 10:20 the next morning. I was in the library with some tea, reviewing trust statements with Ethan when our head of security, a calm former detective named Garrett, appeared at the door. Mrs. Croft is at the gate, he said. She walked here. There's no car. She's just been standing on the curb for the last 20 minutes. I glanced up from the financial reports. Ethan just raised an eyebrow. Is she alone? I asked. Yes, ma'am. I considered it for less than a second. Then I said, let her in. Take her to the formal sitting room. And Garrett, give me a minute before you show her in. He gave a quick nod and left. I slid a hand into my pocket, quietly activated the voice recorder on my phone, and put it back, making sure nothing was blocking the microphone. Ethan saw the gesture. The corner of his mouth twitched, not exactly a smile, more like a nod of approval. I'll be in the office if you need me, he said, picking up his briefcase. Stay close, I replied. The person who entered that sitting room was not the Catherine Croft I had known for 4 years. That Catherine was impeccable, always in a perfectly tailored Chanel suit, a woman who ruled charity boards with a charming smile and a razor-sharp tongue. This woman looked like she hadn't slept for a week. Her eyes were swollen and bloodshot. Her hair was a disaster, and her expensive wool coat was buttoned incorrectly, so it hung all lopsided. Her hands were shaking so much she had to clasp them together to keep them still. She saw me standing by the window, and her entire face just seemed to collapse. Amelia, she said, her voice was tiny and frail. Please, I know I have no right to come here, I know that, but I had nowhere else to turn. Sit down, Catherine, I said. I used her first name on purpose, shattering the formal Mrs. Croft that had always been our wall. I needed her to get it that power imbalance was gone for good. There's some water on the table. She sat, but didn't look at it. She just twisted her hands in her lap, her eyes puffy and pleading. The expression of someone who has witnessed a horror and can no longer unsee it. He's my only son, she whispered. I know what he did. I know all of it now. The other girl, the fake did, they found all of it. And I know you have every right in the world to ruin him. Her voice broke and she bit her lip, fighting to keep it together. But I am begging you, as one woman to another, as a mother to a woman who is about to be one. You understand what it is to love a child so much it blinds you to everything else. I am asking you, please, please show him mercy. Tell me what you knew, I said back. She flinched. Catherine, I repeated, my voice even, my face a total blank. You drove all this way to my house. You stood at the end of my drive for 20 minutes. If you are here to beg me for a favor, you will start by giving me the truth. Everything. What did you know? And when? Her eyes squeezed shut. When she opened them, the performance was over. All I saw was a shattered, disgraced woman who looked like she had aged a decade overnight. He told me the fund was collapsing last summer, she began. I knew he was about to lose everything. I knew about the girl, Chloe. I actually encouraged it, because Chloe was simple. She didn't have your family status or your influence. I thought Julian needed someone who would just admire him in a way you didn't. She paused, and the shame on her face was awful and real. That was wrong of me. I understand that now. It was a terrible, unforgivable thing for me to do. Go on, I said. He told me his plan in November. Her voice got lower. Not every detail. Just that he was going to arrange a rest for you, that you were under too much strain, that you needed some time away to recuperate. He told me he found a physician who would sign the commitment papers. She stared down at her own hands. I asked him if the recovery center was nice. I asked if it was a 5-star place, and he promised me it was, and I believed him because it was just easier to believe him. The tears started then, but they were silent, just sliding down her face without any of the theatrics. This was authentic. This was a woman finally admitting her own complicity to herself, finally seeing the ugly reality of it. He mentioned the forged deed once, she said, and that was the line that sealed her son's fate. He said he had to get the signature just right, that the paperwork had to be perfect so no one would question it. I told him to be careful. I told him not to get caught. Her voice was just a whisper. I thought he was just selling off the property to cover his losses. I didn't let myself see what he was really. She couldn't finish the sentence. I just refused to see it. 10 little words that explained the huge gap between having a suspicion and actually knowing the truth. Catherine, I said, speaking very, very clearly, I need you to listen to me. What you just admitted that you knew about a forged legal document, that you told him to be careful, that you knew he was planning on having me involuntarily committed. That's not just turning a blind eye. That makes you a material witness and a potential accessory to conspiracy and fraud. I watched every bit of color drain from her face. You're going to need a lawyer. Not the family's lawyer, a new one. Someone who works only for you, not for my father's company. You should probably make that call today. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly open, but no sound coming out. Are you saying that I am going to be arrested? I'm telling you to hire an attorney, I repeated. Immediately. She looked as if the ground beneath her had just vanished. She just sat there, absolutely frozen, for what felt like a full minute. Then she began to cry again, but this time it was different, a quiet, defeated sound, the sound a person makes when they finally realize there is no way out of the mess they helped create. My phone buzzed. Amelia, it's Ethan, he said when I stepped out into the hallway. I just received a call from Julian's legal team. He wants to talk to you before the deposition tomorrow morning. He's requesting an in-person meeting. I glanced back through the doorway at Catherine Croft, who was sobbing into her hands, completely destroyed. I turned my attention back to the phone. Arrange it, I said. Through official channels only. I want both of our legal teams in the room, and a certified court reporter transcribing every single word. And Ethan, I want the forensic accountant's final report in my hand before I go anywhere near that building. The law firm's conference room was as cold as a morgue. The walls were a dull, forgettable shade of gray, designed to make you feel nothing at all. A giant mahogany table seemed to suck all the light out of the air. The chairs were black leather, and mine let out a soft hiss when I sat down. Ethan was at my right. Julian's lawyer, a man named Reed who already looked defeated, sat on the far side. The space between us felt like miles. The door at the end of the room opened, and 2 associates escorted Julian inside. He had lost a significant amount of weight. His face was gaunt, his cheekbones sharp, and he had a few days of dark stubble that just screamed of giving up. He wore an expensive suit that now hung on his frame like a coat on a scarecrow. He looked nothing like the man who had cooked me dinner just last week, but he also looked exactly like himself. Because I was finally seeing the person who had been hiding underneath all along. Catherine Croft was already present, seated in a chair against the far wall. It was obviously Reed's idea, a pathetic attempt at showing family solidarity. She sat perfectly still, hands clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed on the table. She never looked at me, not even once. Julian sat down. He just looked at me for what seemed like an eternity. His eyes were bloodshot, the look of a man who hasn't slept in days, or who has been crying. Maybe both. He placed his hands flat on the cold, polished surface and took a deep, theatrical breath, like an actor preparing for a big speech. Amelia, he started, I know you don't want to hear a thing from me, but I have to say this. I need you to know that I understand what I did, and I am more sorry than I have ever been for anything in my entire life. Tell me, I said. He blinked, surprised. He had clearly planned for me to just sit there in silence for a lot longer. The fund was collapsing. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't function. And Chloe just kept insisting it was the only option, that it was a simple transaction. She really got inside my head, Amelia. I know it's a weak excuse, but she was driving the whole thing. She found the shell corporation, she drafted the fraudulent sale agreement, all of it. And the contract? I asked. He looked at me, his face a perfect picture of practiced regret. I signed it. Yes, I did. But I never filed it. I swear to you, I couldn't go through with it. The real deed is safe in the city vault. Every single day I thought about it and I couldn't do it. I couldn't destroy your family's legacy like that. His voice cracked perfectly on the final words. The DA will need to know that. It should be in your formal statement. I would never touch your family's trust fund. I couldn't. He looked right at me when he said it, his eyes glistening with tears he was holding back like a professional liar. I reached into my briefcase. I pulled out the statement from our private banker, already flagged to the right page. I placed it on the table between us. Then I slid it across the polished wood so it was facing him. Page 3, I said. Exhibit A. He glanced down. His lawyer Davies leaned in to see. The line read, Asset liquidation and final wire transfer complete. The funds were sent through a shell corporation. The transaction date was over a month ago. Bank statements prove the money was deposited into a tech incubator that you secretly own. The silence in that conference room was so thick you could feel the pressure. 30 days, I repeated. A whole month. The logs show you were moving the money around the very night before I called this meeting. I watched his expression as the reality landed. I watched those perfectly rehearsed tears finally spill, not from regret, but from the pure, raw panic of being caught. You just swore you couldn't do it. I pulled the report back and closed my briefcase. You didn't even hesitate, Ethan. You did it a month ago, for my grandfather's entire legacy, my whole life. That's... He couldn't even form a sentence. That report is a fake. It has to be... Those are authenticated transaction logs from the bank and they're admissible in any court, my brother Mark said from beside me, his voice calm and firm with an authority that didn't need to be loud. The digital paper trail is unbreakable. It will survive any challenge you can possibly throw at it. Ethan's lawyer was already scribbling on his legal pad, his pen scratching like a man trying to draw a new map after the world had just disappeared. Ethan just looked broken. His whole story was based on one simple lie, and I had just destroyed it with a single piece of paper. From her chair by the wall, his mother Eleanor made a small, sharp sound. A little gasp, like a violin string snapping. At some point, Maya had laid a hand on Ethan's arm, a gesture of quiet support. Now I watched her take it back, very deliberately. No sudden movements. She just drew her hand away, placed it in her lap, and stared at the floor. Ethan saw it. I watched his composure finally crack as he understood what it meant. I stood up. I slid the banker's report back into my briefcase, snapped it shut, and pushed my chair in. I looked at Ethan one last time. I suspect the SEC is going to be fascinated by this paper trail, I said. Then I walked out and didn't look back. A thick, cold fog rolled in from the bay the morning the trial started. It wasn't a dramatic storm, just that soul-crushing San Francisco gray that turns the whole world into concrete and steel. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment before going in, not for some cinematic moment, but to feel the cold air on my cheeks. I wanted to walk into that room by my own choice, not be swept in by the current of what happened. I wore a simple navy dress I'd owned forever, professional and understated. My hair was tied back. I wore no jewelry at all. The faint line on my finger where my wedding ring used to be had finally disappeared a few weeks ago. Now, the blank space just felt like strength. I didn't need his symbols to define who I was. The courtroom was a complete circus. The case had every element the media adored: a Silicon Valley power couple, a stunning betrayal, a pregnant wife, and a scheme to have her declared mentally incompetent. 4 news vans were already idling by the curb. I walked past them without breaking my stride, and my brother Mark, who was right by my shoulder, has a look that tells reporters to think twice about getting in our way. We took our seats in the front row, directly behind the prosecution team. Mark gave my hand a firm squeeze under the table. That's all I needed. I sat beside our lawyer, put my hands on the table, and stared straight ahead. They brought Ethan in 5 minutes later. He was allowed to wear a suit for the trial. Someone had provided an expensive charcoal one that fit perfectly, but he'd lost so much weight it sagged at his shoulders. He looked, on the surface, like the man I'd married. He had the same posture, that engineered confidence, but his eyes were wrong, so wrong I could see it from across the entire room. They were hollow, the unique emptiness of a man who has played his final hand and is just waiting for the dealer to sweep away his chips. The assistant DA, a razor-sharp woman named Ramirez, stood to read the charges: wire fraud, securities fraud, forgery, and exploitation of a vulnerable person, one for me and one for our unborn daughter. Each charge landed in the silent courtroom like a physical blow. I felt every single one. The sheer, methodical cruelty of what he had planned for the woman carrying his child. Ethan's defense attorney did his best. He tried to create a narrative of a man buckling under immense financial pressure, a momentary tragic lapse in judgment. He told the story of a visionary CEO facing ruin who made one awful mistake. He was a good lawyer with an impossible argument, and the jury gave him that blank, polite look of people just waiting for the inevitable. ADA. Ramirez tore his entire defense to shreds during cross-examination with just a few sharp questions. She proved the scheme unfolded over 6 months and involved 3 offshore accounts, bribing a public notary, forging my signature on legal documents, and a plan to liquidate my entire family's assets. Does that, she asked the jury in her closing, sound like a man who just made a bad choice under pressure? Or does it sound like the cold, patient work of a predator who knew exactly what he was doing the whole time? The defense attorney had no answer. He just sat back down. Maya was the last witness the prosecution called. She had accepted a plea bargain in exchange for her full testimony, and she was dressed for the part. A plain gray dress, no makeup, the very picture of remorse. She sat in the witness box and answered every question in a quiet, firm voice that held no emotion. Miss Vance, the prosecutor asked, in your own words, what was the ultimate goal of this plan, as Ethan explained it to you? Maya looked right at the jury, not at Ethan. She said, he told me that once Clara was declared incompetent, his power of attorney would give him full control over her family trust. He said we would sell everything and move the company to Singapore. She paused. He said it like he was ordering takeout. A quiet shockwave moved through the courtroom. The judge tapped his gavel. In the row behind me, I heard my brother Mark let out a long, ragged breath. I didn't look at Ethan while Maya spoke. I just watched the faces of the jury as they took it all in. I saw their faces shift from confusion to realization and finally to a grim, solid understanding. And my mind flashed back to myself 5 years earlier at a tech conference, thinking any man who could talk with such passion about changing the world must be a good man. The jury left to deliberate at 10:45 in the morning and returned at 1:30. The foreman, a quiet man in his 50s, read the verdict with zero emotion, like he was announcing airport departures. Guilty on all 6 counts. The judge scheduled the sentencing hearing for the next week. The district attorney insisted he was a flight risk with access to untraceable crypto funds, and the judge didn't disagree. The sentence came down that afternoon, feeling like the final chapter of a book I already knew the ending to. Ethan Hayes was given 25 years in federal prison, no chance of parole, and was ordered to pay back $80 million. His partner Maya got 7 years. The notary who took the bribe was disbarred and got 2. Our half-built house overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge was now government property. His tech company was handed to a bankruptcy court to be sold for parts. When the judge announced 25 years, Ethan made a noise. It was tiny, almost silent, a choked-off sound that contained the total demolition of every single thing he had ever coded, built, and lied to protect. He never looked at me once. He looked past me to the back of the courtroom where his father was sitting, and the expression on his face is something I will never try to put into words. Some things are just beyond language. He looked like a man who finally truly saw the damage he had caused and knew none of it could ever be undone. Mr. Hayes sat in the last row, staring at his own hands. He didn't flinch when the sentence was read. He never even looked up. A bailiff walked across the room and snapped handcuffs around Ethan's wrists. The click of the steel was shockingly loud in the sudden, heavy silence. They walked him out through a side door. He walked less than 5 feet from my chair, so close I could have tripped him. He stared at the floor, his movements robotic, and then, for just a second, his stride broke. It was a single, tiny hesitation, a flaw so small only someone who knew his rhythm by heart would ever catch it. Then he was through the heavy doors and gone. I just sat there as the courtroom noise slowly swelled back up, the lawyers and onlookers starting to murmur again. I was saying goodbye, but not to Ethan. I'd already done that the night I discovered the hidden accounts on his tablet, and my entire life imploded. No, I was saying goodbye to the woman I used to be, the one who thought she needed his world to be whole. The woman who measured her worth in tech IPOs and charity fundraisers, who never once checked the foundation of her own marriage. That woman was gone. I knew it the way you know a project is finally complete. Not with some big launch party, but with the quiet calm of seeing the final code work perfectly. I stood, took my purse, and walked to the exit. My brother Mark and our mentor Robert were on the steps, braced against the sharp San Francisco wind. Robert had his collar up, hands buried in his pockets. The second he saw me, he crossed the space and wrapped me in a hug, so tight I felt a year of fear just melt from my bones. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Mark just watched us, his jaw clenched, a muscle jumping in his cheek. When Robert finally let go, he held my face between his hands. He just looked at me for a moment, the way he did when I was a kid with a dead bike or a bruised ego. "It's done," he said softly. "It's finally done." I echoed. The wind howled off the bay, cold and indifferent, the way only San Francisco wind can be. I tilted my head back, letting the crisp, real air bite at my skin. Then the 3 of us walked down the steps together. A week after the trial, I drove to the SFPD evidence facility down on Bryant Street. No husband, no brother, no lawyers. Just me, a rapidly expiring parking meter, and a grim afternoon that smelled of sea salt and diesel exhaust. The officer at the desk was young, with tired eyes. He found the evidence bag in less than 5 minutes and slid it over the counter. I signed the form, broke the plastic seal, and tipped the contents into my hand. A vintage gold watch fell into my palm, and some forgotten part of me knew its weight, the way a person dying of thirst remembers the feeling of water. The gold was worn smooth at the edges from decades on someone's wrist. The inscription on the back was exactly as I recalled. There were two faint scratches near the clasp, thin, desperate marks where Adam must have tried to pry it off. I ran my thumb over them. "You okay, ma'am?" the young officer asked, his voice surprisingly kind. "I am," I said, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, it was the honest truth. I was about to leave when the officer stopped me. "Oh, hang on. A letter was routed here this morning from a federal processing center." He listed this as his contact address. "Want it?" He held out a plain white envelope. My name was written on it in his familiar script, the careful way he always formed the C in Chloe. I took it from his hand. I found a vacant bench outside, sat down, and tore it open. The letter was 2 pages, written on cheap, flimsy paper. His handwriting looked smaller than I remembered, cramped and tight, as if he were running out of room. It began with my name, Chloe. "I don't know why I'm writing this. I figure you'll just delete the message." But I needed to say things I couldn't say in that courtroom, not with everyone watching our every move. "I know you believe every word I say is just another pitch. Maybe it is, but I have to try, just this once, to tell you the real story. When we first met, I had no idea about your family's history in Silicon Valley. I know how that sounds, but it's true. All I knew was you were a genius. The way you could look at a single line of code and see a whole global platform, it seemed like actual magic. I fell for your mind, Chloe, long before I learned about your family's venture fund. But then, somewhere down the line, knowing all that, it broke something in me. Not because of greed, but because standing next to you showed me how small my own life really was. I felt like a cheap imitation next to you, Chloe. A very good one, but an imitation all the same. And I couldn't live with that feeling. So I stopped trying to be good enough for you, and I just started taking. I know it's not an excuse. I know our daughter Mia will grow up hearing what her father did. That is a burden I will carry for the rest of my life. It's the one sentence I truly deserve, and I accept it. But I had to tell you that I did love you. Whatever that love became, whatever I twisted it into to justify my own fraud, it started as something real. Please believe that. I folded the letter. I held it in my hand. He was at it again. Even from a prison cell, Adam Cole was trying to code a version of history that never happened. Not deceived you, but I was hurting. Not I committed a crime, but your brilliance crushed me. The letter was a masterclass in social engineering, just like every startup he ever launched. It had just enough truth mixed in to make the lies feel plausible unless you knew exactly where the bugs in the code were. And I knew. I walked to the trash can by the building's entrance and dropped the letter inside. I didn't hesitate. I dropped it like you toss a used keycard when a project is over. Then I walked back into the wind and fastened the old gold watch to my wrist. The metal was cold for a second, and then slowly it started to warm against my skin. I met my sister-in-law, Sarah, at the Bayside Park like we planned. She was watching Mia for me while I took care of some things. This late in the year, the park was almost empty, just a few runners and an old man feeding gulls. Mia saw me from across the grass, and her whole face lit up with that pure, unfiltered happiness that only little kids possess. She came running across the lawn like a tiny missile and slammed into my legs for a hug, her cold nose pressed into my jeans. "Mommy, we saw a seal," she shouted, her voice muffled by my jacket. It jumped right up out of the water. Sarah laughed as she came over. "I think that might have been a big wave, sweetie." "No," Mia said, with the absolute conviction of a 4-year-old. "It was a seal, a real one." She took my hand and pulled me over to the low stone wall bordering the water. "Come on, maybe he'll come back." "Seals don't usually take requests, Mia," Sarah said, leaning on the wall next to me. "This one might," she insisted, her gaze fixed on the choppy waves. We stood there for a few minutes, the three of us, while Mia made little barking noises at the bay, which didn't summon the seal, but definitely got the attention of the seagull man. After a moment, Mia declared the seal had probably gone home for a snack and that we should too. And could we please get a churro, but the kind with the thick cinnamon sugar on it? The ones with the dusty sugar are just not the same. The dusty sugar is a crime against all churros, Sarah added seriously. Mia nodded, her face grim. Exactly. She took my hand and Sarah's and led us toward the parking lot as if she'd just closed a major deal. I looked at her little, warm hand in mine, so certain that the person holding it would always be there to keep her safe. Home, I went into my study and pulled an old photo album off the shelf. The first year we were married, I sat with it in my lap in the afternoon quiet. The leather was soft from being opened and closed countless times. I flipped to a page and traced the outline of his smile. The glossy paper felt cool under my finger. All the little viruses of doubt he had installed over the years were still there, but I wasn't going to burn the pictures. I learned something important from that time. The cracks in a firewall aren't just the damage. They're the log files. They tell the story of what was strong enough to survive the attack. The little charm on Mia's bracelet glowed with a soft green light, a single ping every 30 seconds. I had checked the system that morning. It was connecting to our private server, perfectly encrypted and firewalled, just how I'd built it. A silent, steady signal. My father made the first prototype after my older brother vanished from a department store when they were kids. Dad dedicated his life to planning for the worst-case scenario, and I built my career on it. Aegis Solutions, the encrypted networks, the private security details, it all started on that one awful day. I built fortresses for other families. I just never thought I'd need one for my own daughter. Mama. Mia came bouncing in, holding 2 mugs, her cheeks pink from the cold and flushed with the victory of getting extra large marshmallows in her hot chocolate. I got you the spicy kind, she announced. The absolute best kind there is, I told her, smiling. Obviously, she said, climbing onto the sofa next to me. She snuggled against my side with the full, trusting weight of a child who knows they are protected and loved, and exactly where they're supposed to be. I held the warm mug and just took a breath, my daughter tucked beside me, the city lights starting to sparkle outside. And I finally understood what I had been feeling for months. True security isn't something you get from somebody else. Love isn't about the lavish launch parties or the Silicon Valley mansion. It's something you build yourself. One decision after another, one security patch at a time, the quiet, constant work of protecting your own heart. A siren cried somewhere over the San Francisco skyline. The old heater hissed. I put a hand on my growing belly, and for a second, everything was perfectly secure. Now, looking back, I wish I had known. Betrayal doesn't send a calendar invite. It doesn't give a warning. It just shows up as a notification on your shared cloud account for a new smartwatch bought for your husband's brilliant young intern. Don't be like I was. Don't wait for the data breach to finally trust your gut. You know that nagging voice in your head, the one questioning all the late nights at the office and the sudden business trips to Miami.
Yeah, that voice is never wrong.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not the hero in this story. This whole disaster taught me the only person I could rely on was myself. And the revenge? Oh, it was sweet. Leaking the details of his corrupt deals and watching his precious tech startup crumble felt amazing. But the real victory was my son's small hand in mine on a cold afternoon and the solid, unshakable feeling that I'd finally built a life that was completely ours. I believe some people come into our lives to show us how strong we really are. Our best friends, a good therapist, or even just the tougher version of ourselves we have to fight to become. Stories of betrayal and family drama like this always turn on that one moment, the second someone decides they refuse to stay a victim. That's my take, anyway. Justice begins when you choose to stop being hurt. So please put yourself first. If this story meant something to you, Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and subscribe for more stories about rediscovering your own power. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you for listening. And as a reminder, these stories are dramatized for entertainment and to explore real themes. If that's not for you, no problem at all. But for those of you sticking around, I'm really glad you're here.